79 weeks ago...
78.
Yep, thank you. 78 weeks ago, 40-1 Part 1 was the first episode here on the Sabaton History Channel.
And it's been a very exciting trip since then.
Sure has. In mid-September 1939, Poland was burning. The German invasion had shattered the main Polish defenses in the west and began encircling Warsaw from the northeast. Long trails of refugees were making their way away from the big cities as artillery rumbled in the distance. Smoking craters remained where German dive bombers had struck. Dead soldiers and civilians alike littered the roads. The destruction of the sovereign Polish state was drawing to a close. Still, there was no sign of surrender. By the 16th, the remaining Polish forces were ordered to withdraw towards the Romanian border. There, they were to reorganize and prepare for a new offensive against the invaders. The Polish generals aimed for a long-term defensive battle, their strategy to hold out long enough for their allies to intervene. Those plans, however, were rudely destroyed as Soviet troops began crossing the border in the east. At first, there was the faint hope that the Red Army might have come to their aid. But as Polish troops were fired upon and many of their officers were arrested or even executed, it became clear that this was just the final nail in their coffin. Immediately, the Germans and Soviets began establishing a line between their forces, preparing for a new post-war border. True to the secret protocol in their recent pact, the Polish state was to cease to exist, and neither would tolerate Polish agitation in their zone, which meant that resistance was to be mercilessly crushed. The last remaining Polish forces found themselves trapped in an ever-shrinking cordon between the Wehrmacht and the Red Army. Still, throughout the country, small Polish holdouts kept on resisting. They were isolated and endured overpowering aerial and artillery attacks for days on end, but until they ran out of ammunition and supplies, they would not surrender. One such force was the freshly reorganized Independent Polesie Operational Group under Brigadier General Franciszek Kleeberg. The SGO Polesie had been tasked with protecting the Polish rear and acting as a mobile reserve in the east. Since the Soviet invasion, though, they had been repeatedly fighting off attacks by the Red Army. In fact, they had given the Soviets such a beating that the Red Army refrained from further attacks, so the Polesie was on its way westwards to reach Warsaw. From what they knew, the capital still resisted the German siege. Shadowed by the Red Army, the SGO Polesie made its way towards the Vistula. On their march, they were joined by scattered soldiers, leaderless reservists, and civilian volunteers, bolstering their numbers to around 18,000 men strong. On the 28th, they had just reached the town of Włodawa on the Bug as news of Warsaw's capitulation broke. The government went into exile, and Modlin Fortress, guarding the approach to the capital from the north, was about to capitulate as well after 16 days of resistance. With the last great fortress gone, and nearly all of the Polish forces either encircled or overrun, it was futile trying to reach the capital. Kleeberg instead chose to make for Dęblin and gather whatever ammunition and supplies they could find on the way. They still wanted to prolong the fight as long as possible. Throwing down their arms and surrendering was not an option, and it was still possible that the Allies would come to their help in some way. As long as they kept on fighting, the war was still on, and they remained free men, not prisoners walking into slavery. If they did not surrender, they were not beaten, and Poland still existed. In each village they passed on their way, folk gathered, blessing them and waving them goodbye. Halfway to the Vistula, in the wooded area of Kock, the SGO Polesie was spotted by German motorcycle scouts. The scouts belonged to the German 13th Motorized Division under General Paul Otto, which was currently engaged in mopping up operations southeast of Warsaw. Otto assumed that the fall of the capital would have demoralized the Polish soldiers to such a degree that they would be incapable of putting up much of a fight. Well, He would soon find out how wrong he was on that one.
So come bring on all that you've got. Come hell, come high water, never stop. Unless you are 40 to 1, your lives will soon be undone.
In the early morning of October 2nd, the 1st German half-tracks and trucks closed in on Kock, but immediately came under heavy fire. Kleeberg had ordered his troops into a defensive belt. Now, the area was characterized by small villages, lakes, and forests, which gave the Poles enough space to disperse their strongpoints and control the approaches. They only had a handful of artillery pieces and not even enough bayonets for the infantry, but they could still count on the formidable Polish cavalry squadrons, which could quickly move from position to position and threaten the German flanks. Seeing cavalry, like the Polish Uhlans, engage German motorcycles was certainly a strange sight, but these swift and concentrated cavalry advances proved devastating. In the afternoon, the Wehrmacht returned with artillery, but was unable to knock the Polish defenders out of their positions. And Kleeberg had ordered ammunition and supplies to be stored deep in the forests to prevent them from being spotted from the air. By the 3rd, the Germans had realized that the Polish resistance was way more tenacious and better organized than they expected. More troops were moved forward in an attempt to split the enemy in half, but Kleeberg had anticipated such a move, and his spread-out forces kept denying the Germans a concentrated advance. German motorcycles could circle around the villages, but the villages themselves were too well defended. Fighting over cemeteries and churches caused the Germans heavy casualties. Disorganized, they were about to retreat once more in the evening, and Kleeberg saw an opening. He immediately ordered a counterattack. Both sides clashed well into the night, and although the Polish attack was ultimately stopped, the Germans had been dealt a bloody nose. In fact, the 13th Motorized Division had suffered such heavy casualties that it had to lay low for the whole next day. On the 5th, Adolf Hitler appeared in Warsaw. The excessive victory parade lasted all day long, but not that far away from the capital. The fight for Poland was still going on. The Germans prepared for a general advance to encircle Kleeberg's forces. At first, the attack was fierce, and the Poles were pushed back under the weight of German artillery fire. But as the German infantry entered Adamov Forest, they were met with strong Polish resistance. By grenades and bayonets, the German soldiers were driven out and into the open. There, they were struck by the Polish Uhlans. For Kleeberg, it was a sight to behold. Once again, and for the last time, the Germans were routed and fled in panic before the Polish cavalry. But despite the Polish tactical victories, their strategic position looked grimmer than ever. They had suffered irreplaceable casualties. Horses, men, and motorcycles littered the roads. In the evening, the remaining commanders of the SGO Polesie gathered in a small farmhouse to discuss their fate. They were nearly out of rifle ammunition, food, and bandages. They were isolated, exhausted, without hope of relief, and the Germans were bringing in reinforcements. Ultimately, Kleeberg decided it was time to surrender. No one could say they had not done their duty to their country. On the night to October 6, the last shots were fired. At 2 o'clock, they sent an envoy to the Germans to offer surrender, an offer that was gladly accepted. Still, the Poles hid their weapons around the area to hopefully later continue the fight underground. Some soldiers fled in civilian clothes or hid away. The spirit of resistance remained, even if the last Polish army would not. In the early morning, shortly before marching into captivity, Kleeberg addressed his soldiers one last time. You showed courage at a time of doubt, and you remained faithful to your country until the end. Today, we are surrounded and running out of ammunition and food. Continued resistance offers no hope, but will only shed soldiers' blood, which could still be useful. Today, I take it at the hardest time, ordering you to stop further pointless bloodshed so as not to waste soldiers' lives. I thank you for your courage and obedience, and I know that you will take up arms again when you are needed. Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła. Poland is not yet lost.
No army may enter that land that is protected by Polish hands.
So, it's been 79 weeks total.
Mm-hmm. I
79
agree.
weeks since we started. The first episode here on the Sabaton History Channel, as many of you know, was 40 to 1 Part 1. And we've done an awful lot since then, right?
We have. I mean, we were not even sure where it's gonna lead us
Yeah.
when we were sitting and doing the first things, and we were not sure about the format, how long we're gonna do it. I remember we were doing the first interview, and I was talking so much
Like
because
25 minutes, because,
yeah. Because 40 to 1 is a very emotional song, and there's a lot of stories connected to it. So when I start to talk about that one, it gets very long, and then obviously we decide upon the format that we can't have 25 minutes of storytelling every
I know
week.
some of them are going to write in going, yes, you can. You know?
But since then, we have covered a lot of our songs.
It's
We
true.
have not got all the way yet.
No.
And we have decided also to because we saw a lot of people commenting that they want to have more in-depth information, background stories, and there's always more historical facts about things. So we also went back to some of the episodes and
Sure.
told a more deeper story.
And we did like the trilogy, The Soldier of Three Armies, in 3 parts. And I'm enjoying doing part 2s of things because, one, for the history part, you can go in depth and cover different aspects. But 2, because in every song, there's stories about the song and about things that you were doing. But there's also the story of how the song was written. You can't cover all of that in one episode. So.
No, and we are also, because it's mostly me and Joachim who is here, and
Yeah.
we both have different emotions about each songs. We have different experiences. He was mainly involved in the music writing. Maybe I have some other things about them. So, that's why some episodes like, let's say, 7 Pillars of Wisdom, where he could talk about the musical adventure of creating the song, and I can talk about the adventure of recording the music video
And he
for
can
the
talk
song.
about how much he did not like the actual book.
That's
The
he
actual
can
book.
talk about.
And I got to be Lawrence of Arabia. Hey, can we have some pictures with that, editors? Hey, look, this is us in Tunisia. This was fun. I mean, this was stuff in the last year. I mean, we've done a lot of interesting things. I thought, because I had never ridden a camel before, and the first day we got there, and it was sandy and windy, and my camel was just an asshole. And I thought that's what all camels are like. He was annoying, and he didn't want me to be riding on him. I'd never ridden a camel. I was scared and stuff. I'm not afraid to admit it. I'm grown up enough to admit it. And it was a pain and stuff, and when I had to lean against him, to be sad Lawrence of Arabia, and the camels, and I'm like, I hate camels. And then the next day, I had a different camel, and that was a cool camel, and I was like, oh, this is why people ride camels. This is a great camel. And the third day, my camel, it was like I had the Goldilocks bears in the wrong order. Like the first day was the asshole camel, the second day was just right. And the third day, it was okay. It wasn't as nice as the second camel, but it was okay. The weird thing about that was, that third day we were shooting me from a long distance on these salt flats. So they're filming me from like a kilometer away. So I'm dressed as Lawrence of Arabia, riding my camel, and they're setting up for a new shot, and it takes like 45 minutes. So I'm standing in the Sahara Desert, wearing robes, holding a camel. I've got a little walkie-talkie in my pocket so they can tell me what I'm doing. And I'm sitting there thinking, I was only 51 at the time. I'm a 51-year-old guy from Texas. I'm standing in the Sahara Desert holding a camel dressed like Lawrence of Arabia. I don't know how life got like this, but it's awesome. So it was one of those wonderful moments when you're like, yeah, life is pretty cool. So.
Yeah,
But-
we can't. I mean, we can't really tell the story about how the camels were selected.
When you meet Per in private, if you happen to run into after a show, ask him how the camels were selected. Okay.
Yeah, but it's interesting, and if you think about it, again, 79 weeks ago, we were sitting and filming, and
78.
Okay, and you you had no idea that this is gonna lead to you being in Sahara Desert.
Dressed
with
as holding a
dress.
camel.
yeah, these kind of things we never had a clue that we're gonna end up. And I mean, there's since the beginning of the Sabaton History Channel and all this stuff. I mean, Verdun was kind of a thing we talked about in the beginning, that we're gonna go there and we're gonna do something special on site. And
but that was also only like 2 months after the channel began that we were there. So that was something we had definitely planned. But that was again for the album release as well and everything. And that was a great trip. I got really sick. I got pneumonia, and Joram was scheduling things from 6 o'clock in the morning till 11 in the evening, and then we had to be up at 5 o'clock the next morning. And you can bleep this. And I say, "Are you kidding me? I got pneumonia, and you want to give me 4 hours of sleep and stuff." Ah, happy times, huh?
Yeah. and still we held the beer contest, the beer drinking contest in the final party.
The Tommy Challenge.
And you were full on judge and shouting.
We must have some footage of me being full on judge.
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to say 3, I'm going to say 2, I'm going to say 1, and I'm going to hit my hand here. I'm going to hit here. That's when you drink, okay? All right? You can't touch your lips. It can be close, but you can't touch your lips. Okay? Come on, dummy! All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the ultimate champion. You guys have had good times in your lives before, but never.
Cheers! Cheers! May the best Tommy win!
The smallest stick win.
That's what he said. Okay. The greatest pissing competition of all time. Okay, I'm gonna start my countdown, boys and girls. 3, 2, 1. Go, go, go!
Yeah, that was me judging the Tommy Challenge there. We're done. So, okay, we have had a great deal of fun doing this, but I think we've also done a great deal of good, because a lot of these stories, I mean, you bring them to light by bringing songs about things, some that everybody knows about, sure, but things that are a lot lesser known. And what me and Markus and Sparty and Astrid and the crew try to do is just flesh those stories out to bring them even more into the light.
Yeah.
So,
and you do a great job.
Well, thank you. So, you guys write great songs. All right, well, we could gas away about how awesome we are for the rest of the afternoon, but we'll just have to save that for 40 to 1 Part 3, won't we?
We'll see.
All right, guys,
We'll
see what happens in the future on Sabaton History.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you everybody for supporting. And those who don't do it, click the bell, subscribe, and become a patron. Thank you very much.